Alright YouTube, today I have a project that requires me to install some cable lugs on some welding cable. This would apply if you want to make your own battery cables or if you're working on wind or solar. I'm going to show you a couple different ways to install these. Let's get started. I'm starting with a cable that's already been cut, but if you're looking to cut your own, I use bolt cutters just because it seems to be the fastest, easiest way. You could use a cut-off wheel or a chop saw, whatever you'd like. But I like to start off by removing the insulation. I mark the approximate depth of the connector that I'm going to crimp. You don't want to take off too much insulation or not enough. So I just have a paint marker and I've marked it where I need it. Typically, I just use the standard utility knife. And we're just going to cut a ring right around the insulation. So you can see this cable's not that great, but for my purposes today, it'll be all right. I like to use heat shrink. If you choose to do that, now would be the time to put it on. I'll show you how to shrink it a little later in the video. Now you can see our connector slides right on. And we've got our insulation trimmed at just about the perfect length. I don't know how to pronounce this name, but it's a hydraulic crimping tool that I got from Amazon. They're fairly inexpensive, and this one at least works pretty well. See the crimping tool? It comes with a full set of dies to do almost any cable. Today we're doing 1/0, so we'll have to select the appropriate die. So there's our 2 die halves. And to install in the crimping tool, you just slide them in like so. Now you can see the pistons start to expand. This is going to compress the dies around the cable lug. And when we just start to touch the retaining pin, there the lug's held, I'm going to make sure forcibly that my cable is in the lug. And we're just going to continue to crimp it. Now we came to a stopping point. We have a fully crimped cable. This is what I consider to be the best method. There's a good mechanical crimp. Now we can shrink this tube down. This is just some cheap heat shrink from Harbor Freight. Another note, some people don't care for this ridge. I've seen guys grind it off, but I've never found it to be problematic. So we're just gonna come up here. Yeah, right about there is perfect. Now we have a nice connection that's electrically insulated right up to the point that we need. Now at this point, if you were going to use this for a battery cable, you can use these connectors. I think they're fairly self-explanatory. The only other thing notable on this, if you were using this on a, say like a Group 31 battery, you want to pay attention to the orientation of your second lug connector. In other words, you don't want it 180 degrees off, or maybe in some instances you might want it off, but you'll want to pay attention to this orientation before you crimp it. I'm going to show you the second method that I've used. In this method, we're going to solder it. This is my least preferred method, but if you don't want to buy the tool, something that you're only going to use once, you can do this. Where I see a lot of guys get into trouble with this, they'll use plumbing solder and flux. Don't do that. The flux is acidic and it's actually going to rot your copper cable. What I have here is, it's been dropped and damaged, but it's rosin core solder specifically for electronics. Here you can see I've pre-installed my heat shrink tubing. This has already been cut just for the brevity of the video. So I just have a MAP gas torch. I'm sure you've seen in other videos. We're going to heat this up and melt the solder in until it's about half full. You want to get this pretty hot because the heat from the connector and the solder is going to be, it needs to be enough to wick into the cable. You can see some of the solder came out. That's all right. And we're just going to hold this in here maybe a couple minutes to allow the solder to cool off. If you don't get this hot enough, sometimes you can have a cold solder joint. It's not going to work as well. It's one of those things you'll have to get a feel for. Maybe try to practice on a couple if you're going to do it this way. Now you can see I'm pulling pretty hard on that. We have a good solder joint. I'm actually sliding the insulation back from the cable. The reason this is not my preferred method is if you have, say, something like a winch where you're pulling a lot of amps, you can potentially put enough heat in this cable to melt the solder. So you're going to have to use your best judgment for your application. Just like the other one, we're going to slide our heat shrink up and shrink it down. Yeah, and this is just it's kind of beat up, but it's just a heat gun from Harbor Freight. We have two pretty decent connections, whichever way you choose to do it. All right, so there you have it. We got two quick and easy ways to install cable lugs to make your own battery cables, welding cables, whatever your project may include. Thanks a lot. I hope that helps someone out.